Hi and welcome. We're so excited you have joined us for yet again an incredible cooking experience where you're cooking with us. We're cooking with you in your kitchen. We're in our kitchen, but we're gonna make a delicious meal happen. Really a meal that maybe we couldn't be more excited about because it has everything we love. We're gonna be doing a chili lime salmon. It's one of our favorite blends. We're gonna be putting it with porcini pepper polenta, some beautiful adobo pan-seared asparagus. We have some lovely wine from Oregon, Pinot Noir. We're all about starting the party. I hope you are too.
Yes, we're so happy to have you. The PS Flavor Club is something we started several months ago now. We do our monthly cooking class and we hope that you are watching either as a Pam Smith culinary demonstration or you've got your food ready, you're ready to go. There's a prep sheet, grocery list, and recipe with wine pairing in the files tab of the Facebook group page. And you can follow along with that. If you haven't prepped your food, no problem. Just come along with us, enjoy. We can't wait to spend the next hour with you in what we hope is a stress-free kitchen.
We're all about the stress-free kitchen, stress-free cooking, which is why we do the prep sheet. It's the mise en place, which is everything in its place. It's all about having things together. We've done that, but again, if you're joining us anew and this is your first time at it, sit back, breathe, sip a little wine. We're all going to be going through this together and it's going to be quite magical.
And it is magical, and something that sometimes isn't magical is technology. So if technology tries to get the better of you, your internet goes down, it does whatever internet decides to do, just follow along with the recipe. Hopefully you've printed it out. If not, maybe take a moment and go print it out.
You have time, yes.
Or it's in your booklet if you have your spring kit with all of the spices that we're going to be using tonight. And we are going to use all 3 spices for the spring tonight, so I'm really excited to see how we're going to put those together. If we have technical difficulties, we will get right back with you as soon as possible if the internet goes down. And more than anything, we're just ready for a guest-free, stress-free cooking night.
Absolutely, which is fabulous. And again, I know people are joining at all different places along the continuum. Let me tell you about these spices. The porcini pepper blend that we're going to use first in our now porcini pepper polenta is the spice blend that we used with the porcini pepper steak last month, and it was delicious. Actually today, Jenna, which you might want to talk about Jenna because she's the one that's giving you not just all the great messaging, but she's also the one that's going to be taking your questions. Today, she determined that porcini pepper was a miracle working spice blend, even with bargain meats.
Yes. Bargain meat, bargain beef, whatever your husband or wife may bring home and say, we got to cook this, we got to flavor it up. Jenna decided porcini pepper's the way to go. And Jenna, one of our spice girls, she works with us and she is at the computer taking any questions you may have. So while Pam is cooking, if something comes up and you're like, why are you doing that? Or why did we put that in the order we did? Or is there another way to do that?
Or is there something I could use instead?
Yes. Which
is always a big thing. We get people all the time, we're using both shallots and garlic tonight, and people will say, what, do I need to use shallots? I couldn't find them at the store. Could I use red onion? The answer is yes. But also, could I leave them out altogether? If you're not a garlic fan, the answer is also yes. But those are the kinds of questions that we want to help you with, not just tonight, but because you're part of the club. Any day, any moment that you have that question, funnel it our way and let us help you really kind of gather back the joy of cooking.
Yes, and speaking of the joy of cooking, again, everything has a beautiful segue. We want to increase the joy of cooking for some different people that are cooking with us by doing a giveaway. So tonight's Cutco cutlery giveaway is for this amazing traditional cheese knife. And I happen to know you're going to be using it on a little bit more than cheese tonight. So that should be fun to watch.
Well, it will be, and I will go ahead and say, in case I don't end up saying it later, this is a knife that I'm absolutely in love with, and it's not just me. Again, many of you know I host the Epcot International Food and Wine Festival, and yes, now for 22 years. But Cutco is an incredible partner with the Food and Wine Festival at Epcot, and I started using this knife years ago, but discovered that, oh yes, it's great for cheese, but it's my favorite knife to use for cutting tomatoes, anything that's kind of difficult to slice through. It has these great, dynamic little holes in the knife that pull away not just the cheese, but it's great for cutting vegetables. So we're gonna do that tonight.
So if you would like to enter for your chance to win, just post a picture after the class of your meal with your box, either the mint green spring kit box or the red mini box where you can just get that month's spices. And if you don't have a box and you've wondered, how do I get these spices? Just go to psflavorclub.com, and everything's there. Let's start cooking.
Let's cook.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To an amazing night.
Cheers to you. Hopefully you have chosen your wine of choice or your beverage of choice, whichever it might be. This beautiful meal pairs so beautifully with so many things. We've chosen an Oregon Pinot Noir and the PAM'S pairings. We talked about doing a Riesling. You could do a Pinot Gris, which is what Jenna is sipping on right now. Whatever seems to work for you. Hey, one thing I'd like to encourage you to do is to turn your oven on. We're going to be pan searing the salmon on top of the stove, but we're also going to be pan roasting it, meaning that we start with the searing, but then we get it into the oven. So I want that oven on high. I want it on 400 degrees. So if you've not yet turned it on, go over, flip it on. We're not heating anything up in it yet. Oftentimes when we roast vegetables, that's exactly what we do. And that's actually exactly what we did with the corn that we're gonna be using in the polenta. We talked about in the recipe that you have the choice to either do a roasted or a grilled corn or just fresh corn cut off the cob. We opted to roast it. Nicole actually posted a really great demo of how to roast corn, simply cutting it off the cob, tossing it with just a touch of olive oil, a little bit of adobo seasoning, putting it onto a sheet pan that's already been heating up to 400 degrees in the oven. So as soon as you add that corn, olive oil, adobo mixture, you get the sizzle factor. You immediately get some caramelization in the corn, which you see with the beautiful brown. If you think, wait a minute, didn't do that, no problem. Fresh corn, especially right now, because spring corn's coming in. It's sweet, it's crisp, it's delicious, and will be fabulous in this polenta. But again, if you want to take it that extra edge, roasting is something that you can do. We did that in advance. It holds for you beautifully, which means you can get ahead of the game. You could do that roasting as much as 2 or 3 days before. We did ours this afternoon. We're gonna get started on the polenta though. Why do we start with that? Because it's gonna take about 20-25 minutes to cook. I know many of you joined us a couple of months ago where we did a beautiful citrus spice seared scallops with a almost spring corn risotto. Now it is spring. And we then did a risotto, which is something that it's a labor of love. You stir and you stir and you just put all kinds of love into it. Polenta is similar, a little more forgiving. You'll see that as we start cooking it, but it does take a little bit of time. Now, I will tell you, and I'll give you a few shortcuts. You can take some shortcuts. You can get it started on the stove, actually cover it with foil and get it into the oven and let it do the job. Or if you have an Instant Pot, you can actually do it there and let the Instant Pot do the job. That'll be another class for another time. Right now, we're gonna do it on top of the stove. We're gonna start with shallots. Shallots that we've already done kind of a nice fine mince on. If you've not yet done that, I know many of you have been joining us since our very first class. Again, cutting shallots are not difficult at all. It's very similar to cutting any onion. It's simply letting the shallot itself be your guide. You're just cutting along the lines of the shallot, cutting right through, letting your fingers be very nice and protected. You'll want to do a little bit of a flat move on this to cut all the way through. So then you can simply let your knife guide through and do a really beautiful mince on that shallot. It's as easy can be. Once you have that mixed, it goes in with the rest of its friendly little neighbors, and we're gonna use that then for our beginning to our polenta. We have a pot, a nice heavy bottom pot that is ready to heat up. As it starts to heat, we'll add our olive oil to the pot. Anyone who has seen me cook or heard me talk knows that I'm absolutely crazy about extra virgin olive oil. Interestingly, it's been getting some bad press, particularly for people who are wanting to sell coconut oil. But the truth is, olive oil is the golden elixir of youth for the Mediterranean diet. When we look at blue zones around the world where we see population groups that not only live long but live well, some of the most disability-free longevity on the planet, it's the population groups that use olive oil. So the bad press about you can't cook with olive oil, the only thing that happens with olive oil is that when you cook with it at a relatively high heat, you burn off some of the beautiful nutraceuticals that are in it. That's why it has what's called a lower smoke point. Other oils like a grapeseed oil, an avocado oil, a canola oil don't have those nutraceuticals, so you don't get that smoke point. But I'm not letting it heat that high. I'm not deep fat frying in this, so it works. Jenna, there's a question.
There is a question. We had Lee Thomas wondering what exactly a shallot is.
Oh, that is such a great question. Shallot is kind of a nice little cross, a little bit more peppery. It's part of the onion family, but a little nice cross between an onion and garlic. It has a little more flavor to it, but it's a mild flavor, whereas onions can be a little more biting. Shallots kind of melt into the oil. You don't get that same onion bite. You don't get the little tears that sometimes come for some people when you're cooking with onions. With shallots, it absolutely just gives the flavor. It's a gentle, warm flavor without the bite. And you can already get those aromas, right, Nicole?
Oh yeah, it's great.
Absolutely great. By the way, Nicole is on the Nicole cam, if you wondered where she might have gone.
Just a mysterious
She's
voice.
the mysterious voice. And she is back in the background, kind of being able to give the closer up shots that we're looking to do. What you see happening is I'm just beginning to caramelize these shallots. I put them on a medium-high heat. I'm letting them just cook until they become translucent. Not going to add the garlic until they are translucent. Why? Because garlic tends to burn quite easily. I want to add that and let it only cook for about 30 seconds or so. We have garlic that's already has been minced, again, on your mise en place and on your prep list. We add that to the pan together with the corn, either the fresh corn that you have cut from the cob or the roasted corn or grilled corn. We're going to let that begin to saute with those beautiful shallots in the olive oil for just about 30 seconds. Letting all of that kind of marry together with its flavors, come together, begin to get that little bit of caramelization and crispness in. And then we're going to add our spice. And again, this is a polenta that is spiced and flavored with our porcini pepper. If you haven't had a chance to cook with porcini pepper yet, ooh la la, it is so delicious. As you heard from Jenna a little bit earlier, it is a blend of porcini mushrooms that have been ground into a beautiful powder mixed with a little bit of lemon, smoked paprika, some pepper, coarse ground pepper. Absolutely delicious, and again, miracle working. We're going to add about 2 teaspoons of that to this mixture. You always want to get the spice blend into the pot while the heat is still going, but before you've added the liquid. What happens with that is that intensity of the heat releases some of the essential oils from that spice blend. And again, you're getting some of those incredible aromatics. It's also what starts to release some of the nutraceuticals, some of those incredible benefits and health benefits that come in with it. Once you get that into play, now we're going to begin to add our liquid. What makes this particular polenta so special and so creamy is that we're adding milk to it. We're adding milk because I'm wanting to be able to get all the creaminess that would come from a polenta, but without the butter that's traditionally added to the end of polenta. I'm using a 1% milk, which would cause most people to say, well, that's not going to be delicious at all. But au contraire, instead, what's going to happen is as we're cooking the polenta, the starch is going to cook out into the milk. It's going to give this beautiful creaminess. You can cook polenta in water. That's traditional, actually. You can cook it in chicken stock. There's so many different mediums for cooking polenta. I just love this one. It's a creamy polenta cooked in the milk. It just gives a beautiful texture to the polenta and works out beautifully. So we have that going. We're gonna let that kind of come back a little bit to heat. Clean up my station just a bit. And we're gonna begin to add some of the additional ingredients. There's not much that remains. This is a pretty special recipe in the sense that the flavor's really coming from just this build up and just this beginning. Jenna, we have a question.
We have a couple of questions regarding milk.
Mm-hmm.
If one were allergic to milk, do you have a recommended substitute? And another person asked whether you could use almond milk as that substitute.
The answer to both is that yes, absolutely. If you're choosing not to use milk for any reason, the first step I would use actually is just the chicken stock that I had mentioned, or if you're on a more plant-based diet and would choose to use vegetable stock, that would work out great too. Rather than adding almond milk or adding coconut milk or another kind of milk, which would end up giving a different flavor profile to it, I would go with the chicken stock or the vegetable stock. Later, we're going to be using cheese. So if someone's allergic to milk, there's going to be a couple of modifications we would make to this. We would cook it in a broth, and instead of using the Parmesan cheese or the goat cheese to be able to give that little extra creaminess at the end, we might blend in some other kinds of things, which we'll talk about when we get to that point. So while this is coming back to a boil, I'm going to use my same great knife, again called a traditional cheese knife, but love, love, love this knife, and I'm going to use it to begin to dice the roasted peppers. Now I know a lot of you, because of some of the communication that we had, did your own roasting. You actually took your whole red peppers, got your gas flame or your grill, and roasted the peppers by charring them right into the flame. Others went to the store and bought some peppers, and that absolutely works beautifully as well. All you're wanting to do is get about a cup of those peppers, cut into a nice dice that then we're going to add right to the milk mixture once it starts to come back to a boil, which it's doing right now. In addition to the roasted red peppers, we're also going to be adding just a little touch of a chipotle pepper. This is just this beautiful smokiness that gets added to the dish. Not only using the chipotle pepper that we've seeded and then diced, but also using a little bit of the adobo sauce that is in the can of the chipotle peppers, because again, it just gives this wonderful smokiness. Remember, we're going to be pairing this with a chili lime salmon. So that chili lime salmon is loaded with beautiful flavor from the ancho chili pepper, the smoked paprika, cumin, cinnamon, so much flavor in it. The little bit of smokiness that comes through in the chipotle pepper and the adobo sauce just takes this polenta to a whole nother place. Once you get all that added, we then can kind of sit back and say, okay, this is beautiful. As it comes to a boil, we're gonna now then start to add our polenta. The recipe calls for 8 ounces of polenta, which is about 1 1/3 cups of polenta. We use Bob's Red Mill coarse polenta, or coarse grits as it's oftentimes called. Any polenta will work. I tend to like those that are a little bit more coarse ground rather than those that are a little bit more fine. Polenta is beautiful because, and again, I grew up in the South, so I grew up with grits. So in some ways, I kind of call this a cheesy grits or a creamy grits, But again, polenta sounds much more upscale. There's not much difference in it except for where the corn is grown and oftentimes how it's ground. All we're doing is just gently and slowly adding the polenta, stirring as we go, kind of in a really nice little figure 8 style, so that we're making sure that that polenta is not sticking to the bottom of this pan. Slowly stirring that polenta in. And once it's all in, now the magic can start to happen, because all that's going to happen is it's going to start to bubble and simmer, and in the process of that, the polenta literally begins to break down right into the cooking liquid. Again, in this case, it's milk, but for many of you, as we just talked about, could be a broth or could even be water. We're going to let that simmer. I'm going to let it kind of come back to a boil again, turn it down to kind of a medium kind of a heat. Little warning here is I probably have as many little scars on my arm from polenta burns. I cook it a lot. I love, love, love polenta. But when it starts to bubble, it's almost like lava. And it really can spit and can end up on your arms and your forearms. So really watch that heat and be a little bit careful with it. You want it to be gently simmering, gently bubbling, but not, again, like a lava boil. Yes, Jenna, question.
If someone is using the pre-cooked polenta, how much of that should they be using?
So the pre-cooked polenta is awesome because you can do so much with it. You can, it usually comes in a tube. You can literally just take that tube, unwrap it, slice it into little discs, and rather than cooking it the way we're doing here, you can instead season it with the porcini pepper and do a pan sear with it. With that, what you're getting is this really cool, almost polenta crouton. It's the same thing that I do oftentimes when I have leftovers of this polenta. I will take the leftovers, put it into a sheet pan, just to be able to get a nice thickness, about 1 inch thick, and then can cut rounds with it and use it in a very similar way. It just forms these beautiful discs of polenta that then you can pan sear. You can put then a beautiful egg on it. You can top, again, a piece of salmon or steak with it. It works out great. You can also, though, liquefy the polenta that has been pre-cooked. And so with that, you want to follow the package instructions because they're all just a little bit different. But generally what you'll do is put it into a liquid. So it could either be into a chicken stock, as we mentioned before, or you could do this entire mixture with the milk, the roasted peppers, the chipotle peppers, everything that we talked about, and then melt, if you will, dissolve that polenta into it. But follow the package instructions for the amount of liquid to the prepared polenta, if that helps. So we've got that cooking away. I'm gonna kind of keep an eye on it as we go, but what I'm gonna do now is get started on the salmon. Salmon, again, my dream dish. I probably have cooked this dish so many times it's almost impossible to even think through or mention. The chili lime is one of our favorite kinds of blends because it just, again, makes magic happen. There's something about not just the wellness factor that comes in all of these beautiful warm spices, but then the flavor impact of adding that lime, the turbinado sugar that's in it is a beautiful balance that helps the salmon to caramelize once you get it into the heat, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. We've had lots of questions about what kind of salmon to get. Should it be Pacific salmon, wild caught? Should it be Atlantic salmon? Again, if you know me or if you read any of my writings about seafood, you know that I'm quite passionate about sustainable seafood. I just in a very focused way, follow the Monterey Bay Aquarium Sustainable Seafood. There's a great app you can get for your phone called Seafood Watch, and it gives you a designation, a certification of which fish and seafood is green. That means it's sustainable. It's something you want to be able to include in your eating pattern. It's something that you want to celebrate. If it's yellow, it means that it's relatively sustainable. There may be some things that they're still working on, but if it's red, some of the things we saw with sea bass a few years ago, much of what we saw with even swordfish a few years ago, and much of what you see with Atlantic salmon. Atlantic salmon is not so much of a species, if you will, as it is a designation that it is a farm-raised salmon. It's done by aquaculture, and there's some aquaculture that's done really, really beautifully and sustainable. Some that needs to be growing, and there's sustainability growing practices. We love Verlasso salmon. I talk about it a lot. They're a partner of the Epcot Food and Wine Festival, and we absolutely love the flavor that comes from that, and that's what we're looking at today. It's a beautiful salmon that just has a mild flavor, but again, grown in all the ways that the Monterey Bay Aquarium supports. It's a beautiful certification with Seafood Watch, something that you can feel good about eating, not just for your body, but for the planet as well. I push salmon in a very big way because salmon is loaded with omega-3 fatty acids. It's probably one of the best. I happen to know there's a couple of people out there that are cooking with us tonight but have chosen a different fish. You've chosen cod or you've chosen grouper because you're not a fan of salmon, and that is absolutely fine to do. Actually, almost any protein will work with this dish. You could be using a chicken breast. You could be using a cod or a grouper. You could be using a steak. You could be using tofu or tempeh. Again, the chili lime seasoning just goes beautifully on just about any protein you would choose, be it animal-based or be it plant-based. I've got the pan heating. I put just a little bit of olive oil to heat with that, and now I have my salmon. I have dried the salmon with just a little paper towel. Gonna sprinkle the chili lime rub. How much to sprinkle? Well, it's until you see no flesh. This is a rub, which means you really want to have good coverage with it. This isn't just a little light sprinkle. Instead, you're not using this just as a salt and pepper blend, but you're using it as a blend, as this chili lime is, to get the most flavor impact that's being seared into the salmon. Now, we chose salmon that still have the skin on. I love to cook salmon with the skin on. I'll show you how to cook it with the skin on and then slip that skin off. Once you've got that all covered, you have your pan being heated, now is when you would begin. Remember, we've got the oven heated as well. That's on 400. It's waiting for this pan to come in. I want to get my pan though smoking hot. Same principle that I use if I'm cooking scallops, smoking hot, so that when I get the salmon in, that protein's gonna hit the pan and it's going to immediately caramelize and sear. You always want to be able to put the fish into the dish away from you, and you want to hear that sear. Nicole, you think the Nicole cam is picking it up?
I think it is. You guys can let us know on the other side though if you hear it.
If you don't hear the sear, it's really better to start with it in the pan and then immediately pull it out. Wait until you're getting that real intensity that comes with the sear.
So if it didn't sear a lot, take it out.
I would have put, you notice I put that tip down first.
Yes.
And if I didn't hear that sear or that little sizzle when I started to do, that's when I would have pulled it right out and let the pan heat a little bit more. There's tricks you can do, and I oftentimes do them, where I'll start to heat the pan and I'll flick just a little bit of water into the pan. That will oftentimes sizzle and tell me that it's ready to go. You'll see the oil start to shimmer just a little bit. It'll kind of start to dance in the pan. There's little tricks that you can take a little bit of a look at. Notice, I've got it all coming at me. Notice that I put it down as well, seasoned side first, because what I'm wanting to do is just get that beautiful sear on that first side. I'm gonna let it sear for just a couple of minutes, and when I see it starting to pull away from the surface of the pan just a bit, if you can see, you'll see a little translucence starting right on the bottom. It takes, just a little bit, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. That's your sign that it's ready to turn. You shouldn't have to scrape fish off the pan. If you're doing that, it's usually a sign that it's not really ready to be turned. The fish will tell you when it's ready. And this one is saying exactly that. It's ready to be turned. And when you flip it, that's what you see. It's just that beautiful caramelization. I use a fish spatula, a fish turner, because I really love the way it's thin. I can get right underneath it and do my flip. Gorgeous, right?
So beautiful.
And again, you see that beautiful skin. What's going to happen now is the skin is going to start to cook with the heat of the pan on the bottom. And what's going to happen is it's going to make it really easy to just slip that skin right off the salmon when we get ready to serve it, which you'll see in just a bit. Let that cook again for another minute or so. Go back over, give one little stir to your polenta. I have this again on a medium-low heat. Not trying to let it bubble and like a little witch's cauldron, but just let it continue to cook. I'm stirring it, but as I said, not quite like risotto where it's just a constant stir. Instead, I'm just going back and kind of getting into it. Once the salmon has kind of done a little bit of cooking on the other side, I have my oven set on 400. And now I'll just slip that right into the oven, and I'm gonna let the oven do the job. I'm gonna let it do the cooking. And that's the beautiful thing in this. It's kind of the trick that restaurants use, because if you're trying to cook 20 dishes at the same time, trying to monitor what's happening to that fish especially, or chicken, things that can easily dry out, by getting them first pan-seared and then getting them into the oven, you get more of a radiant cooking heat. It cooks as much from the inside out as it did just when it was searing on the inside itself.
And how long are we gonna leave it in?
We're gonna check it in about 5 to 6 minutes. It's really gonna cook and cook very quickly. And we'll talk about how to know that it is actually ready to go. But while that's in, I'm gonna stir my polenta yet again. And then we're gonna get started on our asparagus, which is again, something to celebrate, because asparagus is so in season right now, and it's absolutely so beautifully delicious. We've gotten used to having asparagus all through the year because it comes in from all over the world anytime you want it. But for years in this country, asparagus was really something that you celebrated in spring, just like strawberries came at strawberry season in Florida in February or early March, and other parts of the world in June, or in other parts of the world even August. You celebrated that, just like you celebrate the asparagus of spring. We now have the opportunity to get it anytime, but when it comes to us, when it's more locally grown, or at least domestically grown, it's something to celebrate indeed. If you're buying asparagus that's more of a pencil thin, I talk about this in the recipe, you're kind of good to go. We're gonna pan-sear that. But if it ends up being a thicker asparagus like this, you're gonna want to follow the recipe instructions and actually blanch the asparagus first. You can do that as a quick trick by snipping off first the ends of the asparagus. You always want to remove those woody ends, and the easy way to do is let the asparagus be your guide. Literally just let it tell you where it should be snipping off. That woody end piece is not desirable to eat. Snip those off, and then you would immerse these in boiling water for a minute or two. Pull them out of the boiling water, put them into an ice bath, which stops the cooking, but it seals in the chlorophyll. One thing you can also do is take these asparagus, these are a little bit more woody, and you can do that blanching in the microwave. You know, Nicole, I do that a lot. It's my little shortcut. It saves me the pot of boiling water. I still do the ice bath, but I'll literally put these onto a plate with just a little bit of water, zap them in the microwave for about 2 minutes, and it does that intense blanching, seals in the chlorophyll, starts a little bit of the cooking process, so that then when I go to the searing, I'm not having to rely on just the heat of the searing. It cooks through and cooks through quite nicely. We're gonna use the pencil thin asparagus instead, even though I've nicely snipped all of those off. The pencil thin is just fun to cook, and it cooks so quickly. I've let my pan come to heat while I've been snipping and talking. Similarly, I'm just gonna add about a teaspoon of oil to this. Going to let it heat.
While it's heating, would you just say again how to know where to snip it off on the asparagus? We got a question
Oh,
saying,
absolutely.
can we just do that a little slower?
Absolutely. So let's see if I have one that I've not yet snipped. Well, let's put one back together.
Yes.
Okay. I think I got crazy and snipped them all. But let's say that this is the end. When I got ready to make the snip, I literally just let some pressure apply to it. I didn't have to know where it needed to come away, because it literally snips on its own. You just apply pressure, and the woody piece, which you can see is almost impossible to even get through, you would want to eat it, just snaps right away from the tender part.
Okay,
so
great. Thank
it's
you.
really kind of its own little guide, which is really quite delicious. I stirred the polenta, by the way, while we were doing that little talk. And now we want to add the asparagus. Again, pencil thin. We're going to add that right to the pan similarly, and let it begin to do its searing action. This is the same principle I would do if I was doing seared broccolini, if I was doing seared cauliflower, if I was doing any kind of a pan sear on the stove. Let your oil come to a heat. Then add your blanched vegetables or your really thin vegetable right to the pan, and then begin the process of pan searing it. What you're looking to do is wanting that to kind of take on just a little bit of caramelization and some browning that comes from that high heat. Now, you can also roast the asparagus. That works out beautifully too. It's the same principle you've already have seen us do, or we have in some of our other cooking classes, where you would just toss the asparagus or broccolini or broccoli or cauliflower, whatever you might be doing, Brussels sprouts, with a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of seasoning, get it into that 400-degree oven and let it cook 10 to 12 minutes. It's a kind of a carefree way to cook. I really love pan-seared asparagus though, as just a point of difference, and also kind of wanted you to be able to see what the difference would actually be. So we're letting that cook, and we're letting it cook away.
And when do we season it?
We season it after it just starts to brown.
Okay.
If we season it before then, what we end up getting is a little bit of burning of the seasoning in the pan. Spices are, food, just like herbs are food. So with that, you want to be able to let the asparagus cook in the pan, and then we'll add the seasoning. In this case, we're doing a beautiful adobo in about the last 30 seconds. There's another question. Jenna.
Ree was wondering what it actually means to blanch your asparagus.
That's a beautiful question. So blanching is just a cooking term that means you're immersing the vegetable in boiling water. The blanching is what seals in the chlorophyll. The blanching is what begins a little bit of the cooking process. It's beautiful to do with green beans, again, asparagus, eating green food, spinach even. If I was gonna make a spinach dip, I would blanch the spinach first, because I want to really seal in that beautiful green. Generally, you do that anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes in that boiling salted water. Immediately remove it out and then put it into an ice bath. The ice bath stops the cooking immediately, and again, it helps to seal in that green color. Great question. Okay, so this is doing just what it needs to do. We're just kind of letting it work its magic. We're letting it start to brown just a little bit. As we start to see a little bit of caramelization on the asparagus itself, that's when we would take the step to add the adobo seasoning. We're adding a teaspoon of adobo seasoning to the dish. It's delicious. Adobo, as many of you know, is one of our favorite. Adobo is loaded with turmeric, so we could actually call this a turmeric spiked asparagus. It's turmeric and onion, cumin, black pepper. Black pepper activates the turmeric to enable it to have its anti-inflammatory effects. Interestingly, asparagus is also a prebiotic. It feeds the microbiota that's in your microbiome, your gut. So this is kind of like a 1-2 punch of wellness right here in this dish. The asparagus together with the adobo seasoning. Once you allow that to saute for just a little bit, you're going to want to get the heat off and then add just a little bit of some freshly shredded Parmesan cheese. And I'm just going to add that right to the dish while we're waiting to serve it. I'm going to let that begin to melt. Wow, is that an umami bomb or what? With that cheese starting to melt on it, absolutely.
We could ask for more adobo and cheese.
I know, everything you could want and more. So that I'm going to pull from the heat. I'm going to let it stop cooking and call it good. I'm going to move over to the polenta, give it one nice stir, and this is the time that I'm ready to taste it because we've been cooking it just about the right amount of time that it should have softened. So good. Anyone who knows me knows that I love polenta. This dish, oh my gosh, it's over the top delicious. Getting that heat of the chipotle, it's absolutely fantastic. So I think that's good to go. I'm gonna add the cheese to that in just a moment. But right now, I'm gonna check the salmon because I'm pretty sure that that is good to go. That polenta is so good. I am so happy. Okay, so the salmon has been working its magic right here. The way I'm wanting to know if it's ready is I'm doing just a little bit of a push test. I push with my finger and see if it will pop back. If you want to instead use a thermometer, you're welcome to do that with the fish. No need to do that because you just get that little bit of a bounce back. If it stays indented, it means that it's probably going to be still pretty rare. If it is firm as a block, it means you probably left it in a little too long, but no problem. It's delicious and it's going to work fantastic. This is ready to go, so out it comes.
It looks amazing.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, it smells amazing too.
I know.
So look at this. We have the salmon, we have the asparagus. We're really pretty good to go here. All that we need to do now is finish the polenta, and I'm going to finish that by adding the cheeses to it. I am going to, however, get this salmon out of the hot pan because I'm a little concerned about it staying in the hot pan. In the hot pan, it has all of the potential for continuing to cook. And although I want it to be getting some carryover cooking, I'm also at the same time wanting to be able to make sure it doesn't overcook. But this is a magic moment because what I'm doing when I remove it from the pan is I'm slipping the fish spatula right between the skin and the salmon, lifting it off, and voila. We have a beautiful piece of salmon. It's been able to cook with the skin on, which means it's inferring all of that great omega-3 fatty acids, all of the great flavor that comes from the skin, but you're not necessarily needing to eat the skin unless you are in love with it. I will tell you that salmon skin is a chef's delicacy. They love to use it, even to shred it and put it onto salads, to use it as a garnish. It's really, really beautiful, and lots of things that you can do with it. It's, again, a good, crispy kind of a topper in lots and lots of ways. But right now, we have it going. I think a few of you probably got salmon that was already skin off, and that's absolutely fine to do. But don't fear it. If you see a salmon with skin on, I think you've seen just how easy it is to do. Jenna, question.
If someone doesn't trust their push test and they want to do test it with a thermometer, what temperature are they looking for?
It depends on how well you want your salmon cooked and what your preferred temperature is. In the recipe, that's exactly what we said. Cook it until the temperature is your liking. I generally like my salmon a little more on the, just a little less than medium side. So I pull it out at about 135. There'll be a little bit of carryover cooking. So I bring it out at 130, hoping to cook it up to 135. People that want to make sure it's cooked all the way through, no translucency in it at all, you would want to pull it out more at 140. It will cook up to about 145. People that want it well done, I will tell you the difference between well done salmon and well done steak is a difference, because salmon has so much omega-3 fatty acid that it's a little more forgiving. But again, you still want to try to get it out of the oven no higher than 145 or 150, because that carryover heat will continue to cook it. So speaking of continuing to cook, the polenta has definitely done that. At this point, I'm going to add my cheese to it, both a goat cheese, which I just love, and because we can, a little bit of Parmesan as well. It just gives that beautiful touch of creaminess to it that I absolutely love. We had mentioned earlier that if people are looking for that creaminess but might have a milk allergy, there's some really fun ways to be able to get that creaminess in. The new hit is to be able to do that either with whipping up aquafaba. Aquafaba, if you've not heard of that, is chickpea liquid. If you open a can of chickpeas and drain them, but keep that liquid is loaded with proteins, and you can whip it like a meringue. It whips up into this beautiful lightness that you can then blend in at the end of the polenta. It's plant-based, so it works beautiful for people that are looking for a vegan option, but it also just gives this incredible lightness if you're trying to avoid cheese because of a dairy allergy. We've added that goat cheese. I'm just gonna let that melt just a little bit, and then I'm gonna add some Parmesan that we have fresh grated. I'm gonna reserve just a little bit of that parm to use as a garnish as well. And then this is good to go. It's gonna be able to just bring in all of that flavor and the essential flavor. I tasted it before. Didn't have quite the kind of saltiness or salinity that I might want, but I wasn't worried about that. It had so much flavor from the porcini pepper. But now that I've added the cheeses that are adding more salt, I want to taste it again and see just what it needs. And I think it doesn't need a thing. I think it's absolutely beautiful. If you want to add a little more porcini pepper, or maybe just a little bit of sea salt to yours, a little coarse black pepper, fine to do. The porcini pepper, I'm going to sprinkle some on at the end. That's going to bring up a little bit of the flavor high notes, but it's pretty delicious. So absolutely happy. Only thing that we have left to do is just to finish off the tomato salsa that we're going to be putting with the whole dish. The tomato salsa just gives this spring touch of freshness and deliciousness, which I'm really excited about. I love this. You can do it in a variety of ways. You can do it quite easily by simply cutting cherry tomatoes in half. Cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, whatever you might have. This is another place that I'm so happy to use my trusty cheese knife, but again, it just cuts through tomatoes so beautifully. A good friend of mine, Chris Prosperi, who comes to the Epcot Food and Wine Festival from Metro Bis, Chris, if you're watching, hello, absolutely is in love with this knife. He talks about it every single time that we're together. You can either cut these into halves, as we did. You can cut them into quarters. You can make this little salsa in any shape, form that you want. It's just a very fresh, very quick salsa. Again, tomatoes work. I've used berries with this. When tomatoes are not in season or not fresh, I can use raspberries in this. I can use even blueberries. Again, salmon is just so incredible. I'm gonna add a little acidity to it. I'm gonna do that with a lime that we're going to both zest and a lime that we're going to juice. But Nicole, you have a question.
I do. Should their polenta stay on a low heat, Or
Yeah.
should they take it off?
Yeah, there's no need to have it on the heat at all. Once you add the cheeses, there's enough, again, heat that's in this little brew and the thickness that, because we're going to be serving it right away, really no need at all. Just give it a little stir here and there. If you were going to get ahead of this and do it before your guests came, the answer is yes. You could keep it on a low heat, or what I tend to do is try to cook it for a couple of hours before, let it be, I've done all of my work, and then I keep it just on the stove, no heat, and then when I get ready to reheat it, I just add a little more milk to it. I'll wait, if I'm gonna cook it in advance, I'll wait and I'll add the cheeses and the milk after I start the reheating.
Perfect, thank you.
Now, the lime we're using for this, I have zapped in the microwave. This is not a new trick for any of you. It's not like a new hack, but I zapped it in the microwave for about 30 seconds because I want to get a lot of juice from this. The microwave cooks inside out and it releases a little bit more of that juice. But before I do get the juice, I want to use the incredible zester, the microplane that you got for those of you that had your kit that came with the spring. This was our little handy trick that we added in. We've done everything from grating garlic with this to, again, zesting a lime, zesting lemons, and again, literally rub that microplane right across the lime, tap it right into your dish, and then you can begin the process of squeezing it. Again, cut it in half, and once you see what happens with this, into your citrus squeezer, and then straight into this amazing amount of juice. I'm always like an ooh and ah when I do that because it's just so much beautiful juice, acidity that comes into it. Again, I know many of you that were with us for our winter cooking club, this came as part of your winter kit, and just so much fun to use. In it goes, and all that we're going to now do is add some more of the porcini pepper, just a half a teaspoon. People are always a little wowed by that and think, well, why would you add porcini pepper to a tomato dish? That seems so strange. Well, no, it's not, because tomatoes together with mushrooms have this beautiful blending. It's a lot like beef and mushrooms. It causes a beautiful umami blend. It's almost becomes like MSG in a bottle, and that's even what we're calling porcini pepper because of all of the beautiful spice blends that are there in those great porcinis. It gives the unctuousness, that umami that comes in a very natural kind of form. You get that in place, and then all that we need to add to it is a little bit of cilantro, just a nice quick chop of the cilantro to give just a little bit of the freshness there, and then we're ready to plate. Jenna, any final questions?
I think we're good right
I think
now.
we're good.
It's looking so great.
I think it is. This is a good time, people, to take a little sip of the Pinot or whatever you might be having. I did just a really light kind of a slice, if you will. You could use your kitchen shears to be able to get that cilantro in, because I'm really wanting that freshness. I'm not looking for a fine mince. Just want a lot of the freshness that comes from it. You could even pull the leaves, and that would work out well. And then get a little taste always. I know you think there's nothing I cook that I don't love, but that is really so fresh and so delicious. However, I'm going to add just a little touch more porcini pepper. Just think it needs a little bit more. The tomatoes, maybe not as sweet as I would want them to be, and that's important to know. Produce is living, produce is changing, and that's why you, yes, want to always follow a recipe, but you also want to taste as you go. Tasting spoons may be one of the most essential parts of a cook's arsenal of flavor. Jenna.
We had a request for another look at the cilantro.
At the cilantro.
Before we chopped it.
Before we chopped it. Okay. So cilantro. Cilantro is just absolutely either people's love or their hate.
That's funny. Right as you said that, someone else commented, if you don't like cilantro, what else can you put in the salsa?
Well, I'm sure many of you have heard this, but your hatred, if you have that, of cilantro, and it's usually not just that you don't like it, it's usually very visceral. You do not like it. You hate this taste. Again, rumored to have a taste like socks, dirty socks, or soapy water. Not that I've ever tasted either of those, but it really is a DNA thing. It's a genetic proclivity that's literally programmed into people's DNA, just like people that don't like Brussels sprouts don't like them for a reason. It's programmed into their DNA, or might have had a mom that didn't cook them the best way.
I
So
was
you
about to
always
say,
wanna try.
I think that you just gave everybody an excuse to not like Brussels sprouts. What my mom always told me is your taste buds change.
They grow up.
That's right.
Every 6 months. And so we always try some different things. But if you don't love cilantro, don't think that you're going to grow to love it. You probably won't when it comes to cilantro. But use flat leaf parsley instead. Flat leaf parsley is not the same kind of flavor that you get from cilantro, but if you're not a cilantro fan, then understandable. Jenna actually is growing this in her garden, and it's prolific. That's all I want to tell you. Flat leaf parsley just gives a little earthiness and a little fresh flavor, a little acidity to a dish, so absolutely fine. Flat leaf parsley, not the curly one. That's great for something, produce garnish, I don't know, but this is what you want to use, flat leaf parsley instead, or the cilantro. Okay, so we've got it all together. I think we're ready to plate. Everyone's feeling good?
Feeling great.
Okay, so let's do this. We look oftentimes at what is the best plate to do. This has so much freshness and so much color to it. We decided that we would do this on just a really beautiful, clear white plate. And that's what we're going to do. If I was plating this for a crowd, there's a lot of ways I could do this in a nice wooden board. But for a single serving, I think what we're gonna do is just get a little mound of the polenta onto the plate. I'm gonna take the spoon and just do a little bit of a swoosh right with it. Everyone knows I'm quite crazy about my little swooshes. We're going to then put one of our beautiful pieces of salmon right atop that little swoosh. So nice. We're then going to take our cherry tomato salsa. We're going to let that kind of just fall as it may onto the polenta, onto the plate. Again, we're not into fussy plating here. We're just into really putting the flavor in and putting the flavor all together. And again, letting the food kind of talk to you, letting it give you all that you need. I'm gonna move this forward.
We have asparagus.
I know.
It looks so good.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I know, it's really kind of spectacular. And then we're gonna let the asparagus that has a little bit of Parmesan that's been melting on it just kind of come right aside.
Oh.
And voila, we have a beautiful dish with chili lime seared salmon. We have porcini pepper polenta, little bright cherry tomato salsa, and then adobo pan-seared asparagus with a little touch of Parmesan cheese. And the only thing missing is a glass of wine. Again, Oregon Pinot Noir. This is Acrobat Pinot Noir, as a matter of fact. And you being able to plate, you being able to grab your wine and have your trusty sidekick, if you're cooking with someone, as Nicole and I have been cooking together, our perfect time to say cheers and to say bon appetit to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited. Hope you love this meal as much as we do. We can't wait to cook it and can't wait to see you again. Next class.
Yeah, June the 12th is coming up. We're gonna have our adobo avocado burger with chili lime ketchup, which just sounds amazing, and then a fresh corn and tomato salad.
Yeah, we're gonna do something really fun with the burger. We decided to do that for June because it kind of kicks off burger season, but this is gonna be a burger seasoned with a difference because we're gonna do a blended burger, which we're really excited to let you see. It's a burger blended with roasted mushrooms and really fantastic. So can't wait to see you then. Give us lots of questions, post your pictures, enjoy your meal, and one more time, bon appetit and cheers.